Good evening, everybody. Our top stories: President Trump due to land in Buenos Aires in about an hour, taking with him his America First message of free and fair trade to the summit of G20 leaders, including Chinese President Xi Jinping, who is feeling the full force of Trump policy and American tariffs. We'll talk about the president's efforts to save American jobs, to stop Chinese theft of American intellectual property, with former State Department senior advisor Christian Whiten. Also tonight, the out-of-control Mueller witch hunt has reached new depths of pathetic desperation, this time trying to squeeze the president's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, over a business deal that never occurred.
We had a position to possibly do a deal to build a building of some kind in Moscow. I decided not to do it. The primary reason, there could have been other reasons, but the primary reason, it was very simple. I was focused on running for president. There would be nothing wrong if I did do it. I was running my business while I was campaigning. There was a good chance that I wouldn't have won, in which case I would have gone back into the business. And why should I lose lots of opportunities?
And disturbing new revelations about the threat posed to public security and public health by the caravan massing at the U.S.-Mexico border. Hundreds of migrants, reportedly known criminals carrying potentially deadly infectious diseases. We take up that report with former FBI intelligence officer Steve Rogers with us tonight. Also, Rhino lame duck speaker, you remember him, Paul Ryan. He lost the House for Republicans. He sabotaged candidates, but none of that stopping him from lecturing the Republican Party on who should be the party's next standard bearer. We'll tell you about his latest outrage here next. Our top story: President Trump on his way to Argentina tonight, where he will assuredly push ahead with his America First agenda. While at the summit, the president will also sit down with Chinese President Xi Jinping to discuss the ongoing trade dispute between the two countries. Prior to his departure for Argentina, the president addressed the prospects of a new trade deal with China. Soon after Air Force One left the tarmac, the administration announced the president would be accompanied by White House trade policy advisor Peter Navarro. At that meeting with Xi, news that the left-wing business media, get ready for this, they decided at that moment the market was down, so they blamed, that's right, Navarro showing up at the Xi dinner for the market's losses. Then the group at CNBC claimed upon news of Navarro's attendance at the Xi meeting, stocks fell to their lows of the day. The network also said then stocks were trading higher, but, quote, dimming hopes of a trade deal between China and the U.S. capped gains on Wall Street. And then the market moved higher, of course, and they didn't know what to say. Here to take up the president's trip to the G20 summit and what to expect from his meetings with globalist leaders, Christian Whiten, former State Department senior advisor to the Trump and George W. Bush administrations. Christian, great to have you with us. Let's start first with China and the prospects of a deal. This sounds like some advertising for some real disappointment for those who are expecting the president to continue his tough policy position on trade with China.
Yeah, it also sounds like deja vu. You know, we supposedly had a big deal with China early in the administration at Mar-a-Lago, and that was supposed to lead to some wonders of trade. Chinese didn't really do anything with it. That fell apart. And then earlier this spring, March, April, I think Larry Kudlow went on TV and said the trade war is over. Interesting. They didn't want to call it that before. And that there was some deal. The president looked at this deal and then decided to apply sanctions. And I think, again, the Chinese are doing that. They're raising hype. They're going to try and offer some framework and say, we're serious this time. Trust us, and just don't put the higher tariffs that are scheduled for January 1 or that second or the third tranche of big tariffs that the president has offered. But, you know, nothing really happens at the G20. And I don't think China is going to fundamentally change its system over dinner. Yeah, over dinner, nor has it shown any disposition to do so. The president himself putting the kibosh on these reports, what he would likely style as fake news, that there would be some sort of framework come out of this, which is usually, no offense, Christian, you've given your background in the State Department, it sounds like typical gobbledygook coming out of the State Department.
that it just means nothing and really portends nothing.
Right. Well, and it also could be coming out of the Treasury Department. And as you point out, it's the left of the financial press saying they're hearing what they want to hear. But if you look at Xi Jinping having just crowned himself, he's in no mood to make compromises either. And it would be disastrous, of course, for President Trump to make a compromise that undermines the hard work he's done.
You know, we've got all sorts of, in this administration, we actually have never-Trumpers within the administration who are working very hard. I give you Anonymous, the author of that anonymous op-ed in the New York Times, who's never been found out, or at least identified publicly. This is a strange time, and the president deciding today that he's not going to meet with Vladimir Putin because of his aggression against Ukraine. What do you make of it?
Well, here again, we see the president is much tougher on Russia than his predecessors. Of course, the media still say he's soft on Russia. Yeah. They say he's friendly with dictators. Obama and his Secretary of State, John Kerry, said they were going to get tough on Russia after Russia invaded Ukraine. The year after that, in 2015, John Kerry goes hat in hand to meet with Vladimir Putin, who keeps him waiting, and then they chuck it up for 4 hours. Trump has actually isolated Russia. He has armed Russia's opponents. He has reacted significantly, and he doesn't get credit.
Well, you know, who else doesn't get credit is Silicon Valley and high-tech companies, big tech, and their relationship with China and their acquiescence, it appears, in politics in this country. They're not standing up supporting the president. They're not trying to forcibly, volubly stop the theft, hundreds of billions of dollars by China. Why not?
Well, they see it to their financial benefit, I assume, although I don't think in the long run it is. You know, I don't think in the long run it's good for Apple that they were not willing to help the FBI unlock a terrorist cell phone, but they are willing to help China censor the internet. All across Silicon Valley, they're complaining now that the administration, that the government is finally looking at Chinese here who are conducting industrial espionage, Chinese nationals who are viewed as overseas Chinese by the Chinese government. They are put under close surveillance. So are students here from China, and they are used as assets. And we finally are getting to the point where we're saying this is not good. This is being exploited by our adversaries and will harm our security. You know, if Silicon Valley got smart about this, send home the Chinese nationals, it would actually be better in the long run. They may have to pay Americans a few more bucks to do these jobs, but they'll save money in the long run because they'll keep their intellectual property. Yes,
and there will be more people who would be able to afford an Apple iPhone 10. It would be, I think they would find, to their advantage. There's a new China study out from the Hoover Institution, and I want to read this part on the new China study, saying beyond economic, if we could put that up, please, beyond economic espionage, theft, and forced technology transfer, China also captures much valuable new technology through its investments in U.S. high-tech companies and through its exploitation of the openness of American university labs. There is absolutely no vetting of students being brought in from China. These Chinese nationals are an important source of that technology transfer. That's a nice expression for theft. It is a calamity that's befallen this country, and there is such a willingness on the part of the leftist universities to continue this. 20% of most universities, major universities, are going to international students instead of Americans to begin with. One has to ask, why is that? And why? Who are they serving?
Well, they're serving the needs of their administrators. Of course, the professors are mostly left-wing, but the real, the mushrooming of staff of, 18 vice chancellors for diversity and gender studies at these universities, that's where the money is going to, a new building, not actual education. So, yes, add to the ranks of unpatriotic Silicon Valley types, add universities. And you know who really suffers are Asian Americans. We've learned, of course, from this recent lawsuit that Harvard, for example, has a quota on Asians that they're willing to accept, and so they'd rather
Asian Americans.
Exactly. And so these Chinese who are here, often being used as assets by the Chinese government, will pay full ride. So they are pushing aside Asian Americans who we ought to be training and ought to be giving technical skills, not our adversaries.
Yeah, isn't it extraordinary? Asian Americans, citizens, are being screened, and And international students, including Asians, are being welcomed with open arms as they help to maintain, if you will, those high tuition levels for universities that, for the most part, are repositories of left-wing indoctrination. Christian Whiten, good to have you with us. Thanks.
Thanks, Lou.
Look forward to seeing you soon. Up next, with just a few weeks left in Washington for this Congress. Oh, they don't want to work too hard. 5 weeks remaining. Just a little under that now. Feckless, lame duck Speaker Paul Ryan using his remaining days, well, to just be an annoying son of a gun.
I think the Fed is, by the way, on the right track, normalizing.
Was that issue on the front of Donald J. Trump's mind?
I think the immigration issue is more on the front of his mind. My own view was I would rather talk about the economy. We don't want to have a shutdown. I have no interest in doing that. That makes no sense. He does create some hostility. The Jim Acosta thing, Bob Mueller has been left alone. I think he's going to continue to be left alone. But we still ran on this better way agenda. We put it into place. We put most of these things into law.
That man is absolutely delusional and self-absorbed. Did I mention that? We'll take up this ludicrous excuse for a speaker with Ed Rollins when we come back. Stay with us.
This program is brought to you.
Rhino lame duck Speaker Ryan says his former running mate, you remember the one who did so well in the 2012 presidential elections, that is, incoming Senator Mitt Romney, will soon pick up. The obstruction is standard for the Republican Party, left by John McCain.
He feels a sense of civic duty. I think with John McCain passing, for example, Mitt believes that there is a role for him in our party, in being, a statesman and a standard bearer in our party.
We've all been waiting for that. You can tell that Paul Ryan has been. It must have slipped his rather fragile mind that the standard bearer of the party is the President of the United States, for he is the party's leader, and frankly, it's only hope. Joining us tonight to discuss all of this, top strategist for Great America PAC, former Reagan White House political director, Fox Business political analyst Ed Rollins. I have to say, the speaker continues to astound with his obtuseness, his absolute delusion.
Well, they didn't believe in what Trump was advocating, which is the conservative principles of the Republican Party. Romney didn't believe in it. That's one of the reasons he lost.
Romney didn't believe in anything but Romney. And Ryan doesn't believe in anything but lining his pockets with K Street. These guys are owned by the establishment.
My great fear is that Romney's going to get in there. And when you've got 2 or 3 vote margin, anybody can play queen for a day. And Romney, talking about him being the McCain basically destroyed the effort to get rid of Obamacare by 1 vote.
Not basically, he did.
And so we don't need another one. And it would have been easier to elect somebody else in Utah. Utah is not exactly a liberal Northeast state.
It's getting more so, though.
Yeah, but, he was very insistent. He wanted the president's endorsement. The president was generous and did endorse him.
And then he attacked the president.
Right. And my sense is that Mitt Romney gets out there and wants to basically be the new John McCain. There's a lot of us that are conservative that will go out there and attack him for whatever form we may have.
The Republican Party seems to be at an existential juncture. You've got idiots like so many of those in leadership in both the Senate and the House who are working against the president actively and vigorously. If they did their jobs with half as much energy, much could be done by the Hill, but they don't have that, and they don't have. Frankly, I can't even imagine why there's such a thing as a Republican Party right now, because you're watching this kind of nonsense. Mitt Romney coming in, Paul Ryan going out. All of it is so.
Well, unfortunately,
pathetic.
Paul Ryan's not going away. Paul Ryan's going to be there somewhere. He has an ambition to be president someday.
You know what he's going to do.
Yeah, well,
he's going to line his pockets
for a while, and then he'll go back to politics in Wisconsin and run for governor or run for something else.
So what's the Republican Party going to do? Because they look like damn fools.
Well, the Republican Party today is Donald Trump. If you don't like that, then go find another party, because the vast majority of Americans who say they self-identify as Republicans, overwhelmingly, even more than when I worked for Ronald Reagan, are Trump supporters.
Yeah, and Trump supporters have got to be scratching their heads tonight Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, has just hired a never-Trumper, a pro-China, mad fanatic free trader at any cost to America, Mary Kissel. I mean, how does she get hired?
I have no idea. I'm shocked by it. I like Mary personally. I've been on many shows with her here, but she is not a Trump person. She doesn't believe in the policies that the president advocates. And for her to be going in as a senior advisor to the Secretary of State, to me, is
let's
astonishing.
look at a couple of things that we're talking about. She called, for example, the Helsinki summit with Putin and the president a great propaganda victory for Putin, called the Trump administration's aid to farmers a taxpayer solution to a government problem, criticized the president for canceling military exercises with South Korea. It goes on and on. She is just, it just doesn't make a lick of sense. And why she is there is, you know, there are enough never-Trumpers and Bush establishment types that permeate the government, as well as, of course, Obama leftovers. Well, what the hell are they thinking?
With the 2 years left in this administration, this term, and to get ready for a re-election campaign, you've got to make sure your people are loyal to you and believe in what your policies are. And if I was still in the White House,
what is Mike Pompeo thinking?
I have no idea. I mean, someone should have said to him, "No, thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. You cannot have her. You want to give me a rationale why you can have her? All you got to do is go read her columns, go read her tweets. She's been very public about this. And again, she's a nice person, articulate person, but not a Trump person."
The previous Secretary of State for this administration did the same thing and got his tail kicked. This one, it looks to me, deserves the same response by the White House. Well, I can't imagine why it's not happening.
The president or someone ought to have a real heart to heart with him, saying this is the most important thing we're going to be doing the next 2 years is our foreign policy stuff, and this is my policy. I want people over there to advocate my policy. And the State Department's hard enough to move forward on anybody's agenda but their own. So
the great thing is this president is moving things by himself.
Right.
This is the man driving the North Korea engagement. He is also driving the new doctrine against China. And frankly, as Christian Whitten pointed out, this president has been far tougher, for example, than his predecessors against the nonsense of Vladimir Putin.
Well, I would hope our good friend John Bolton would basically step in and do something on this front. So,
well, thank goodness that John's there.
Absolutely, I agree.
Ed Rollins, as always.
Thank you.
Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Congressman Jim Jordan bowing out of the race to be the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. Jordan's spokesman saying this, quote, "It has been made clear to him that leadership is going to be selecting someone else," end quote. Of course, Kevin McCarthy is a mini-me of Paul Ryan, establishment hack. There remains a possibility Jordan could challenge Mark Meadows, talking about an extraordinary development for ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. I wouldn't bet on that either, with Kevin McCarthy following in Paul Ryan's footsteps. And by the way, I'm sure following this guidance of the same K Street masters as did his predecessor. Be sure to vote in our poll tonight. Do you believe Rhino Paul Ryan will soon join the Democratic Party, where he has belonged throughout his political career? Cast your vote on Twitter at Lou Dobbs. Follow me on Twitter at Lou Dobbs, and like me on Facebook. Follow me on Instagram at Lou Dobbs Tonight. Up next, the left-wing national media has their hair on fire over Michael Cohen's new plea deal with a special counsel.
It's Shakespearean because somebody who said he would take a bullet for Donald Trump is now pointing the gun at him.
Today is a good day for Donald Trump to resign. I really believe that.
We finally have a rational explanation for why he was so pro-Putin.
What this represents is the possibility of something very simple, that there was money in it for Donald Trump.
The plea today by Cohen tells us that there is a financial connection here.
Michael Cohen could be the single most terrifying person for Donald Trump.
Oh, yeah. Frightening, scary. Oh, boy. Washington Times columnist Tammy Bruce joins me right after the break to take that up, as well as the latest in the Mueller witch hunt. Golly, all of that evidence that they have built over the course of 2 years, it's just astonishing, isn't it? No wonder the president, well, we'll take that up next. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Breaking news now. President Trump will not be meeting with Russian President Putin during the upcoming G20 summit in Argentina. President Trump tweeted out his decision earlier today, citing growing tension between Russia and Ukraine. Russia hasn't yet released the Ukrainian vessels and sailors that it seized last week in the Black Sea. President Trump slamming the Mueller witch hunt again this morning in a series of tweets, calling the probe illegal, ridiculous, and a disgrace, all of which are true. We'd like to add it is simply pathetic. In addition to working out a plea deal with former Trump attorney Michael Cohen, who has zero information about the president's alleged Russia collusion because there is none, Mueller now focusing on late-night phone calls between Donald Trump and Roger Stone. That's what he has been reduced to in this. Mueller is trying to squeeze author Jerome Corsi, a journalist and conservative, who said he will be filing a criminal lawsuit against Mueller. Mueller is absolutely, his tactics have blown up in his face since Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort reached a plea deal, and we'll see how that works out. Joining me now to take up the president's upcoming G20 summit, the impact it could have on the United States, China, and Russia relations, Tammy Bruce, Washington Times columnist, Fox Business contributor. Great to have you with us. I've got to start with Ryan. Can you imagine this? I mean, the words fail me. He is such an ignoramus that it's unspeakable what the speaker is.
It's remarkable. And I think he's serious when he expresses a kind of a genuine shock at why they would have lost the midterms and not knowing why that would happen. I do think, though, that he's not necessarily a dumb man. I think he knows.
Oh, I think he is. I think you're very safe to go there.
A lot of Republicans wanted this kind of a punch at the president. I don't think that they necessarily mind losing the House, because now they
Republicans?
I think they don't mind the Democrats being in charge and leading the charge.
Who's they?
The Republicans in the House.
You mean
the leadership?
Oh, the leadership.
Oh, yes. Well, certainly not all of them. The Freedom Caucus, but I think.
Well, they're complete idiots then, and they should lose. They should be then disbanded.
Well, they're the managers of the monster. I think this argument that there's partisanship in Washington is a fraud. I think that's theater for the hoi polloi in the country, and that this is really about pulling the wool over our eyes and getting the monster to be as plump as it can be and managing it while pretending to really be conservative or liberal. That's what I think the Republicans have been doing for quite some time.
The Republican Party, the establishment wing of that party, the vast number of Republicans. I think you're right. There is a little problem, though. You've got a guy by the name of Donald Trump, who's president of the United States. He ran against the establishment. In point of fact, he's running against every one of those idiots in the Republican parties who are really Democrats posing as Republicans. I think you're right in that construction. But this president is right now. He is harvesting, these seeds of anti-establishmentarianism that he has been planting throughout the country for several years now. This is a real war. It's a fight that I hope the president doesn't ever get tired of waging, because so much depends on his strength, his leadership, and the weakness of these fools. Like, I mean, there's no other expression for what a Paul Ryan is.
There is a sentiment, I think, that...
And Kevin McCarthy, by the way, is coming in right behind him.
Oh, yeah.
He's the same bunch.
The president would be making a mistake, and I'm sure that people are telling him that the fight would be over after the midterms. Everyone will settle down. It will not, because the fight for the establishment...
No,
I'm sure
Speaker
some advisors
Ryan told
are.
him that.
Well, and other advisors within the establishment probably are telling him that, when in fact they know, as you are correct, this is a long-term fight. This is not just about this term or this presidency. This is about whether or not the Donald Trump attitude, the new GOP, would survive. And it's a GOP that would be led by a man of action, Donald Trump, with ideas that would help the American people, where management of the monster is no longer acceptable, that we've got to cut it down and really have government work for the people.
Do you think the American people have got the stomach for it?
Oh, yes. We're the American people who defeated the British when everyone said we couldn't. Look at what we've accomplished from the beginning.
But that wasn't last week. That wasn't last week.
We are even more, I think, being revolutionary is in our DNA. We're even more committed to making sure that this experiment works because we are a relatively young country. Our generations will make it work. It's not going to fail on our watch. I can tell you that right now.
Okay. And I'm going to say, I hope the heck you're right. Tammy Bruce, always good to have you.
Thank you, Lou.
Thanks so much.
Great.
After calling for a free Palestine at the United Nations, the destruction of Israel, CNN finally cut ties with Mark Lamont Hill. While his comments were polarizing for CNN, it's apparently just remarkable that his other employer might keep him on the job. You see, Hill also is a professor at Temple University, and they say, quote, his views are his own, no problem for them, that he is anti-Israel and calling for the destruction of the country. Incredible. Up next, critical health concerns now involving more than a third of the 6,000 migrants crammed in a Tijuana, Mexico sports complex. We take it up with Trump 2020 Advisory Board member Steve Rogers right after this quick break. Stay with us. We'll be right back. On Wall Street, stocks closing lower, slightly, barely. The Dow down 28 points. The S&P lost 6. The Nasdaq down 19. Not bad, since the Nasdaq yesterday was up 200. The Dow up more than 600. Volume on the big board backing down to 3.5 billion shares from 3.9 yesterday. Crude oil up nearly 2%, $51 a barrel. Gold closed flat. Silver down nearly 0.5%. Copper lost nearly 1%. And a reminder, listen to my reports 3 times a day, coast to coast on the Salem Radio Network. Disturbing news tonight out of Tijuana. 6,000 migrants crammed into a sports complex there. More than a third of them are being treated for health-related issues. More than 2,200 medically treated. More than 60% with respiratory infections. And 101 cases of lice, 4 cases of chickenpox, serious concerns about the prospect of hepatitis because of the unsanitary conditions in which they're living. Other concerns also being outlined by the Department of Homeland Security. They've identified now more than 600 criminals and gang members that are traveling in that caravan. Joining me tonight to talk about the growing crisis on our border, security concerns, and the president's fight to build a wall, of course, Steve Rogers, a Trump 2020 Advisory Board member, former Navy Lieutenant Commander, and a former FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force member. Steve, great to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's start with that caravan. The president doing the right thing, securing the border. He's being attacked, as he is always, no matter what he does, by the establishment, by the left, by the right, by the Wall Street Business Roundtable, Chamber of Commerce, and then, of course, Chuck Schumer and all of his buddies.
Lou, after 9/11, as a military intel officer, I was assigned the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force. And we were watching. We were gathering intelligence and information about that border. And we had concerns back then, way back then. Who's crossing the border? Of course, our concern was somebody would bring a dirty bomb across that border. But we knew there was a drug cartel. We knew there was human trafficking. Nothing was done until Donald Trump became president of the United States.
By the way, he's the first president and first presidential candidate to speak openly about the drug cartels and their role in corruption, not only in Mexico, but at the border. By the way, the American people are coming to the realization that corruption south of the border means there's corruption to the north of the border. And we're not doing nearly enough to fight that.
And he's delivering on his promise that he would protect the American people. When you hear about 600 gang members this week, a gang member from MS-13 was arrested. I mean, my goodness, how many did we not catch? So when he talks about protection, he meant it, and he's delivering.
Yeah, and by the way, MS-13 gang members are throughout the country, for crying out loud. This is the first president to actually do something about it. His Justice Department making headway, one of its few public, at least, accomplishments to this point. The Cohen guilty plea, your reaction to what the left-wing media is making of it. Here's a business deal that was never done, and now the great I mean, you listen. I don't know if you saw the clips that we had of the left-wing media just going nuts.
Yeah.
There's
Lou,
no deal.
Lou, when I was doing investigations and police work and had a witness, a so-called witness, change his story a dozen times, how do you believe him? Where do you believe him? Look, Michael Cohen's out to save his own hide. And if he thinks he's going to save his hide on the back of the President of the United States, well, he's got another story coming his way.
The president's saying that he's going to play tough with Democrats if they continue to frustrate him and attack him. That he's going to release some documents that they will find very disturbing, the documents about them. What do you make of the promise, the threat, however you would style?
Oh, I believe that he knows what's in those documents. Timing is everything. I know he cares for this country, and I know that perhaps he doesn't want to do damage to the country, even though it's the Democrats. He cares about our country. But if he has to use those documents to defend himself, go ahead. You know what, Lou? The American people, despite what the polls say, I'm out there, they support this president. They value his judgment.
You know, I'm troubled by a number of reports that are coming out. One is that there would be a framework of a deal that he might reach with, and this may be driven by Chinese propaganda in this country, that he might come up with a framework that would be satisfactory for a while and defer tariffs rather than continue with the tariffs and stay tough with them. And by the way, if that were the case, there would still be the matter of $500 billion in stolen American intellectual property each and every year. These are disturbing reports, and they're being driven in some measure by, I'll call them what they really are. They're never-Trumpers and establishment rhino Republicans within his own administration.
Well, let's look at that. Let's look at what the president has done already. He has never compromised on the security of this country. Never. And I believe that he's going to be driven by that, even with this issue in China.
Well, I think you're exactly right. And I have to wonder, though, when we look at this Mary Kissel appointment, a never-Trumper. I read to the audience a number of the tweets, her absolute pro-China, pro-fanatical, actually, free trade beliefs, and her attacks on the president. What in the world is Mike Pompeo thinking of, and why? How could you even rationalize this?
Well, difficult for us to rationalize it, but I got to tell you, I trust the judgment of the president, and I'm sure he is going to make sure she or anyone else supports his policies. He's the boss, not Mike Pompeo, no one else. He's the president of the United States.
I think that may be a news break for Mike Pompeo based on his most recent hire.
Well,
thanks so much,
right.
Steve. Great to have you here, Steve Rogers. A new report from the Center for Disease Control shows life expectancy in this country has declined for the second time in the past 3 years. The average life expectancy last year fell to just over 78.5 years old. The CDC says an increase in drug overdoses and suicides in this country are to blame for this alarming trend. Last year, nearly 70,000 people died from drug overdoses, a 10% increase from the previous year. Last year, more than 47,000 suicides, up from the 45,000 the previous year. Overall, nearly 3 million people in this country died last year. That's 70,000 more deaths than in the previous year. Up next, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg telling Congress his company doesn't sell your data. That doesn't mean they don't try, or that they really don't. Really, what does it all mean? We take it up after the break with cybersecurity expert Morgan Wright. He joins us here next. Stay with us. Internal emails show Facebook considered profiting by selling companies access to your personal data. The emails reviewed by the Wall Street Journal also suggest Facebook employees talked about pushing some advertisers to spend more in return for increased access to user data. Joining me now to take up what is going on in Silicon Valley and big tech, to take up Facebook and the company's growing struggles and the increased cyber threats from Russia, from China, and Iran. Former senior advisor in the State Department's Anti-Terrorism Assistance Program, former law enforcement advisor to the RNC and cybersecurity expert, Morgan Wright. Morgan, great to see you. I want to compliment you on your recent op-ed in The Hill, in which you said point blank that high-tech's globalism is killing patriotism in this country. This is, right now, it seems to me the prospects for regulating out of control technology companies with huge economic concentration and power this time may be right. What are your thoughts?
That's why Sarbanes-Oxley came about, Lou, and you know those things that led up to that, Adelphia, Tyco, Enron. Pretty soon the government said, hey, we're not going to take this anymore, and so you go through litigation, you sue, you go through regulation, like with the SEC and the FCC and the FTC, and then pretty soon it's like, okay, Congress goes, we've had enough of this, we're going to pass the law, and now it's going to be, codified, and your guys are going to, and people went to jail, Lou. People went to jail with Sarbanes-Oxley. So, what we're going to find out is that I think this issue of privacy is the watershed moment where we start looking at what's happening in the EU with the 7 countries that have filed against Google for tracking them, the issue of privacy, Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. This all has to come to a head sometime, and I think 2019 is going to be the year for it.
It's a hell of a note when the Europeans have more impressive laws protecting consumers, protecting our personal data than does the United States. It's incredible to me that we have lagged this far and given high tech such a pass. I want to just turn to a specific issue, and that is Google. Pinchai is going to be talking before the finally we'll be talking to Congress. Meanwhile, he's doing business with China. It's an extraordinary mess. There's just no constraint, and apparently no effort to rein in Google and its absolutely pro-Chinese policies, which are effectively, the result is anti-American.
Look, and that's why one of the reasons I wrote the op-ed. And look, my father was a World War II vet. He was also a Vietnam vet. I mean, there were people that we lost a lot of people in defense of freedom to fight people like what China has become. And what has happened is we lack this patriotism now. It's okay to have America first. We can still have a view of the world. But in that op-ed that I wrote, in the research that I did, I found out that 47% of these CEOs believe in globalism. They believe the world should profit first before and be taken care of before the United States. But yet they built their businesses on the opportunities that came from the United States.
That's right.
And I think Google's opening up the AI, the Artificial Intelligence Center in Shanghai, and they go, it's going to be a vibrant place. Well, guess what? In China, nothing gets built there that doesn't get shared with the military. Yet they turned our military down and threw them to the curb on Project Maven on using artificial intelligence so we could save soldiers' lives and save other civilians' lives so they don't become collateral damage. And yet, where's the outrage on that? They were more concerned about Project Maven than they are the censored search engine that Google is defending still to this day. They say they're not building it, but they haven't thrown it to the curb yet either.
Yeah, and meanwhile, we're watching Chinese companies continue their advances here. The front companies that are carrying out espionage, 20% of places reserved for foreign students in our universities. You can mark it any way you want. It is a zero-sum game. That means 20% of those seats didn't go to an American student. Right. And there is no discussion whatsoever, no public policy about what has occurred by most of these universities that are left-wing driven. They are left-wing indoctrination centers. And we're looking at statistics now and surveys showing the millennial generation is the product of that indoctrination process in our public schools and our higher education.
Yeah, during a congressional hearing, FBI Director Wray talked about the Confucius Institutes, to what China's putting all this money. He talked about that this is simply a front for the Chinese government to commit espionage, to commit the theft of intellectual property. 60% of the foreign students in the United States now are Chinese. We have them in some of the most sensitive programs, getting PhDs in things around material science and artificial intelligence. And guess what? All of that's going back to China, along with the forced transfer of technology. If you want to do business in China, you got to play by their rules. Hey, if they want to do that, that's fine. I think we ought to do the same thing to Huawei and ZTE and all the other Chinese companies who want to sell stuff in the United States.
And this president relented with President Xi.
Unfortunately, on Huawei, he did, absolutely.
And that's got to be reversed, too, because what is happening is it's just unthinkable that we're letting this happen to this great country. And this president is responsible for driving these policies that will preserve the republic, one hopes. Morgan Wright, always good to have you with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir.
And I think it should be very clear to all why it is that the establishment is represented by the leadership of the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, why Wall Street, the Koch brothers are having a fit as this president's policies move us forward. They can't stand it because they know they're going to have to give up their globalist interest in favor of America first. Well, Morgan Wright, always good to have you here. Broward County residents will be footing the bill for Brenda Snipes' election antics, even after she leaves office. You know, I call them antics. Some would call it fraud. Starting in January, Snipes will receive a total of $130,000 a year in pensions. Residents of Florida will be paying for her incompetence for years and years to come. For a job well done, of course. Up next, well, you know what? I'm going to surprise you on the side. We'll be right back. Stay with us.